Well, howdy, cowpokes! Welcome to Story Time with Mr. Ryan. It's Black History Month, and so today I thought I would take some time and read for you about a legendary horse breaker and rodeo personality, George Fletcher, in Letterbuck. George Fletcher, the People's Champion, by Vaunda Micheaux Nelson with Gordon C. James. This is a great story, and I love Vaunda Micheaux Nelson. I've read a few of her works on this channel, so if you're interested in reading others, just go ahead and search Vaunda Micheaux Nelson in the search bar above this YouTube channel, and we'll show you the other videos. Let's hop on in, shall we? I love this one. It's really fun. The Old West may be gone, but memories and legend live on. Ask any cowpoke, and boy howdy, he'll tell some tales. Ask a cowboy from Umatilla County, and he'll for sure come around to the story of the Saddle Bronc Championship at the 1911 Pendleton Round-Up and a bronc buster named George Fletcher. George was a rider folks in these parts can never forget. Even made it into the National Cowboy Hall of Fame. But we're putting the wagon ahead of the horse. We gotta go back a ways to reckon how he got there. Tell you what, it wasn't easy. George had to buck up and get tough at an early age. He was just about 10 years old around the turn of the century when his family packed up and lit out from Kansas on the Oregon Trail. They had folks in Pendleton, so it seemed as good a settling place as any, but there weren't many black people in eastern Oregon, and most whites in Pendleton didn't cotton to them. George suffered meanness and hurt because of his skin color. Life at home was no bushel of peaches either. He had to make his own way. George found a kinship with the children he'd come to know from the Umatilla Indian Reservation, where members of the Walla Walla, the Cayuse, and the Umatilla tribes lived. George was so good-natured, they found him easy to like back. He started bunking with the families of his Indian friends. George took to their ways like a wet kitten to a warm brick. As they played together, he learned their languages and how they saw the world. George's favorite game was riding a make-believe bronco. One boy straddled a barrel while others pulled cables attached to it to make it buck. George wrapped his legs tight around the imaginary horse and clenched his knees. It was plain as the ears on a mule he was born to ride. George was purely tickled when he moved up to riding beef calves, but when his hip pockets first landed on a horse, he was smitten. He got thrown a lot at first, but just kept getting back on. Every day George marveled more at these magnificent animals. He was spellbound by the drumming of hoofs beneath him, the swirling and swaying, the rocking and reeling, his dance like a wild Mustang. That was where he belonged. George watched the tribal horsemen and listened well. From them he learned to train horses in a calm and gentle way. He never pushed. He blew lightly into their nostrils so they could breathe him in. With his tender manner, George could tame a horse without breaking what he loved so much, its spirit. Ranching fit George like made-to-measure boots. Life in the saddle and riding rough were all he hearkened for. George knew he could ride just about anything. He first rode for prizes at the age of 16, but some rodeos and exhibitions shut out black cowboys. When he was allowed to compete, the judges hardly ever treated him fair. It stung, but that didn't stop George. He was set on showing what he was made of. At one Wild West show, George offered to ride the worst of the worst in a saddle bronc contest. Handlers tried to ruin his ride by turning the horse loose before George was up and ready, but George showed them a thing or two. He swung into the saddle, rode the animal to a standstill, and won the day. In farm rodeos and staged exhibitions around Pendleton, Georgia, rode horses. George rode horses. Bulls, even buffalo. If it bucked, he was getting aboard. One time, George and another black cowboy named Jesse Stahl gave spectators a show to beat all. They rode the same bucking bronco seated back to back, with George facing the animal's head and Jesse facing south. Folks liked putting George to the test, challenging him to ride the most ill-tempered beasts just to see if he could. One day, he took a dare and mounted a bad bronc on a city street in downtown Pendleton. He rode the buck out of the bruiser, but got himself arrested because their dance spilled up onto the sidewalk. George faced a judge and paid the $5 fine, still eager to show off his skill. He got his chance a few months later at the 1911 Pendleton Round-Up. It was the biggest rodeo in the Northwest. 15,000 fired-up fans packed the grandstand. Horse racing, bull riding, steer wrestling, roping, and other tests of cowboy skill, nerve, and vigor brought cheers and groans from onlookers, but nothing beat the Saddle Bronc Championship. 3 top-notch buckaroos made the finals. Jackson Sundown, a Nez Perce Indian, John Spain, a White Ratcher, and 21-year-old George Fletcher. The prize was a $350 silver-trimmed Harm Lee saddle. The broncs were about half wild. Local stockmen brought their roughest, most unrideable outlaws to the event. Luck of the draw matched them up with riders. Each cowboy pulled a horse's name from a hat, hoping for a rank, hard-bucking cayusen. Half the winning points came from the horse. The tougher the outlaw, the higher the score. A buckaroo choked the reins with one hand and kept his other in the air. Any cowboy who pulled leather, touched the saddle of a horse with his free hand, was disqualified. Bronc busters stayed on as long as they could or till the animal bucked out. First up was Jackson Sundown, riding Lightfoot. Jackson was 48 years old, but didn't look it. Far from it. He was tall, lean, handsome, carried himself with smooth elegance. Like George, Jackson had been rough riding since boyhood and has earned his reputation as a horseman. Lightfoot was fierce and furious. He leaped and twisted, snorted and kicked, even turned out and tried to bite Jackson's leg. Jackson, his long braids flying, kept his seat until Lightfoot turned tricky and charged into one of the mounted judges. Saddle crashed against saddle, and Jackson's foot wrenched free. He took flight and kissed the ground. Sundown was carried off on a stretcher, but was hurt most by being disqualified for losing a stirrup. John Spain rode next, forking Long Tom. John was 30 years old, 6 feet of rock solid. He stuck to bucking horses by sheer muscle and grit. Inspired at an early age by Buffalo Bill's Wild West, he'd been riding the shows half his life. Long Tom was brawny and athletic. An expert bucker, he easily threw most riders. John wasn't most riders. Tom lunged and plunged, pitched and heaved. In a final effort, the outlaw crashed through a wooden fence between the arena and the racetrack. It was a dandy ride, but onlookers claimed Spain pulled leather when Tom broke through the barrier. The judges said they hadn't seen it. At last, it was George's turn. Shouts of "Let her buck!" cascaded from the stands. George had earned the esteem of the crowd with a sensational semi-final ride on Hotfoot, a mean jackknifing piece of horseflesh. George tipped his hat to the crowd and mounted Dell. He was ready, but the horse wasn't. Usually a prime performer, Dell dipped, tossed, and ran, but doggone it, the obstinate outlaw refused to buck. It looked like George's luck had soured. "Re-ride!" the crowd clamored. "Re-ride! Re-ride!" The judges chewed on this a while. Then one spoke through the megaphone. "Saddle another for Fletcher." Handlers led Sweeney into the arena. Sweeney was a high-jumping, sun-fishing arm jerker. He reared on his hind legs and bucked wildly. Unfazed, George quickly found the rhythm of the ride, the rise and fall, the whirl and twirl, the spin and swerve of outlaw and horseman. Calls rang out, "Ride 'em, George, ride 'em!" George stayed with Sweeney, raking his spurs from shoulder to flank, even waved his hat and smiled. Fans kept to their boots, cheering and howling, "Let her buck! Let her buck!" George rode Sweeney with such ease and abandon that the crowd shouted itself hoarse. He was as limber and elastic as a rubber band, and easily made the most showy ride of the roundup. That's how the newspaper told it. After the ride, everybody stood rapt, waiting for the winner to be announced. In due time, one of the judges called through the megaphone, "John Spain, first. George Fletcher, second." Silence filled the arena. "Boo! Boo!" erupted from the stands. Spectators were certain George would be the champion. The crowd roared angrily, but the judge's decision was final. George took to it like a cowboy. He'd felt this sting before. John Spain, astride the prize Harmley saddle, made his victory ride past the grandstand as the crowd applauded. When George Fletcher loped by on his old, worn saddle, fans exploded with unbridled cries and whistles. Sheriff Tillman Taylor was a Round-Up board member and a man of honor. This didn't sit right with him. The Umatilla County lawman plucked the hat from George's head and cut it into small pieces with a jackknife. He waved a piece in the air. Rodeo goers caught on fast and eagerly paid $5 each for a George Fletcher keepsake. When all was said and done, those folks collected more money for George than the prize of the silver-trimmed prize saddle. They'd plumb decided, heck with the judges, George had won. In the warm glow of the setting sun, spirited spectators lift George onto their shoulders and paraded around the arena. Someone hollered, "People's Champion!" which swelled to a resounding united chorus. "People's Champion! People's Champion! People's Champion!" Just you ask any Umatilla County cowboy, he'll tell you. Well, thank you all very much for watching this story time. I hope you guys had fun, and I hope you guys enjoyed my Great People series. It's been a fantastic month. I hope you guys are enjoying my Black History Month series. Thank you all very much for watching. And again, Vaunda Micheaux Nelson is an excellent author. We've got a few of her books on this channel, so don't hesitate to check them out. Until next time, I'll be seeing you. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.